presentation. I'm Melissa Jolls with RDA Impact, and Tony Nethery, owner of Blue Collar Training, is your presenter today. The presentation will take approximately 45 minutes, and we will follow up by sending everyone on the call a copy of the test with instructions on where to send it so we can get you your certification certificate. If you have multiple people watching today, that's fine. We're also, you can take the test and receive the certification as well. We'll give you instructions for all of that. And we're also recording the presentation, and we'll post it on the website under training videos. And if you have questions throughout the webinar, you can type those in the chat box at the bottom right of your screen. And Tony will answer those throughout the presentation today. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tony.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tony Nethery, and I am the owner of Blue Collar, and I'll give you just a very short introduction. I've been in the collision industry for about 36 years. I'm an ICAR instructor, an AMI instructor. I have worked directly with the EPA for the state of Tennessee on the 6H rule, specifically with Small Business Administration, and I'm not affiliated with the EPA, so other than I have worked with them to try to help shops be compliant. I'm also the CEO of Blue Collar Collision Training. So that's enough of an introduction, and we'll get into actually get into the presentation. First of all, we're going to talk about just an overview and the resources that you might have available to you, and that is in the first section. And then beyond that, in the second section, we'll actually talk about some painter training and actually provide some training for your painters. The first thing we're going to look at is the purpose, an overview of the rule, the training requirements, the stripping operations and coatings, what's required of your shop for your spray area, and compliance and record keeping, and then resources. The purpose of the update and the training is simply to give you an overview of the EPA Rule 40 CFR Part 63 Subpart 6H. And those are the requirements for surface coatings operations at area sources. The information on documentation that assists collision centers to be compliant, and then training for the paint technician. The EPA Rule Overview is simply this. It is a national emission standard for hazardous air pollutants, paint stripping, and miscellaneous surface coatings operations at area sources. We're going to talk about exactly what that means to you as a shop owner, and who that affects and who it doesn't affect, and that type of thing. The purpose of the rule is established to control emissions of target hazardous air pollutants in the collision center environment and surrounding community. What we have here is a photo that was taken back in 2000 from the Terra spacecraft to show hotspots or concentrated areas of pollution and how it's moving across the country. And you can see in North America we have probably some of the largest areas of concentration of air pollution. All of this started probably back in 1982, when they passed the Clean Air Act, and they began to take air samples and look for high areas of air pollution. As a result of that, the Clean Air Act was passed, and states began to work on improving the quality of air. And obviously in large metropolitan areas where there's a lot of industry, it's worse than in areas that maybe it's not. So let's talk about what this means to the collision center and the basic requirements for the collision center. First of all, notification to the EPA was required by the collision center back in 2010, by January the 10th of 2010. So hopefully you've already done that. If you haven't, we will talk about what's required to do that. If you're a new shop and you haven't done it, then you still have time to do it. To my knowledge, there's not penalties in most states for filling out the forms at this point. At some point, if you are a collision repair facility, you may be called on, and they're going to want to know when or why you didn't complete that notification. So if you haven't already done it, it's something that you probably need to do. If you have already done that, it is required that you retrain your painters every 5 years. And that's why we're doing this today, is because we're coming up on January 2015. So people that actually did this back in 2010, it's coming up on time for them to update that notification. You had to notify the EPA by January the 10th in 2010. You actually had to show or give them notification that you were compliant by January the 10th of 2011. So basically you have this coming year to re-up your notification if you did it 5 years ago, and if you haven't ever done it, you need to do it probably as soon as possible. One of the things that's required is training of your paint spray personnel, and then you need to have the proper records that you keep yourself. So that brings us to the question of what parts of the collision center are covered by the rule, and the first one is paint stripping operations. When they first passed this paint stripping operations information back in 2010, 2009 and 2010, a lot of people more or less went into panic mode. We're going to talk about that for a few minutes and coming up in here in just a few minutes. But most of you probably do not have to worry about the paint stripping operations, but probably most everyone is under the spray coating operations, and that's what we're going to spend the majority of the time talking about. But to know whether or not you are required to give any kind of notification on the paint stripping, it was geared toward operations using methylene chloride for the partial or complete removal of surface coatings from wood, plastic, or metal substrates. And many of the aircraft strippers, many of the paint strippers that we use for automotive finishes that were referred to as aircraft strippers did contain methylene chloride. So as a result of that, a lot of shops went out, and if they had any of that in their shop, they took it out and got rid of it altogether. And there was even, I know even some paint suppliers removed it off of their shelves. And that was probably unnecessary, because the requirements for paint stripping were basically this. You had the optimization of the stripper application. You had to have proper storage and disposal of anything that contained MECI-bearing materials. You had to have a minimization plan for use exceeding 1 ton per year. I do not know of any collision repair shop that uses a ton of paint stripper per year. So as long as you're not using more than a ton per year, which I cannot imagine in most collision repair shops, then you really do not have to put any type of plan together on the paint stripping. You simply would note on the notification that you do use some products that use methylene chloride, but you would not have to put together any type of plan or any type of documentation other than some type of documentation showing that you're not using that much. And that can probably be provided through whoever your supplier is. All you would have to do is keep invoices that show that you only buy a few gallons a year, and then if that's the case, you're not even required to do anything else. So what you would need to do is identify if you are using any paint stripping materials, include a method of information on the EPA initial notification. So again, mark on the notification that you do use some, and then just have a way of documenting how much you use per year. Indicate if you plan to use more than a ton. And like I say, cannot imagine any collision shop doing that. So from the standpoint of the paint stripper, you can probably pretty much dismiss that for most collision centers. That brings us to the surface coatings. So you might say, well, I'm doing large trucks, or I'm doing horse trailers or livestock trailers or motor homes. Am I still under the same rule? And the answer to that would be yes. The motor vehicle and mobile equipment surface coating operations that involve spray application of coatings at area sources to various vehicles that may be drawn or driven on a highway. So it doesn't matter what you're spraying, what type of vehicles you're spraying. If they're driven on the highway or they're pulled down the highway, you are under this rule. The miscellaneous surface coating operations that involve the spray application of coatings that contain compounds of target HAPs to miscellaneous parts and or products made of metal, plastic, or their combinations. So what that's actually saying is if you're spraying anything that has what they consider heavy metals. A lot of paint manufacturers have tried to remove as many of the heavy metals out of their paint line as possible, but there are usually still some heavy metals contained in certain colors. It may be a low enough percentage that it doesn't matter, but still some of the products that you use probably will contain some heavy metals, things that have chromium in them, such as chromium yellow, and most mixing banks usually contain some heavy metals. And then some of your primers and sealers actually contain some things that are considered heavy metals. So no matter whose paint you're using, you probably are still under the rule, or you need to consider that you're under the rule. And so that brings us to the subject of, could I be exempt? And there are some things that are exempt, but they probably don't apply to most of us. But here they are, and in short version, if you're using a device that has a cup capacity of less than 3 ounces, if you're doing powder coating, if you use nothing but handheld, non-refillable aerosol containers, or if you use non-atomizing technology or thermal spray operations using solid metallic or non-metallic materials. I don't know of any of us that use any type of non-atomizing technology. I've never been in a shop that uses any type of thermal spray operations. Chances are we're not going to limit a collision shop to aerosol containers, and most of us do not do powder coating. Most of us do use spray applications, which brings us to the point that what if I used a 3-ounce cup and I didn't use anything more than that? That piece of the rule was put into place by the EPA for the sole purpose of allowing hobbyists to be able to spray coatings. For guys that do airbrushing in the mall, for people that just use airbrushes primarily. Most airbrushes have a 2-ounce bottle, and so they thought if they made the 3-ounce rule that that would make people that do things like airbrushing exempt.
Tony, we have a couple questions here.
Okay.
The first one, wouldn't it just be easier for me as a shop to file as being exempt?
Okay, and that's kind of where we were going with this piece of it. You could say that I don't use anything but 3-ounce cups, so that makes me exempt. But like I say, that piece of the rule, the intent was to cover those people that only do airbrushing and that type of thing. And so they have actually added a little verbiage to that in the current years in some states. And they went on to say that that is a disposable cup that can only be refilled one time. So using 3-ounce cups does not make you exempt. The other piece of that is, as we progress through this, you'll see there's really only a few things that you have to do to be compliant. And in my opinion, and this is strictly my opinion, if I can do those things and be compliant with the rule, then I am probably much better off to do that than to try to prove that I'm exempt. Because I would suspect that probably 90% of the shops across the country are going to try to be compliant. And if there's 5 to 10% of the shops that say we're exempt, if I were an EPA inspector, those would probably be the first shops I would visit. So I think you're probably better off to go ahead and try to just be compliant than to try to prove that you're exempt. It's probably a simpler process to be compliant.
Okay, one more question here. It says, may need to explain what HAPS is, what it means.
HAPS is hazardous air pollutants. Sometimes we refer to it as volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and that's anything that goes out the stack of our paint booth that would be hazardous. And so HAPS is for hazardous air pollutants.
Okay.
Okay. So as far as being exempt, it's possible that you might could prove that you are, but again, I think it's probably simpler to just try to be compliant. So if I do choose to work toward being compliant, let's look at some of the coding requirements. And this is, again, we're still in the first section, and so we really are reaching out to the shop owner, shop manager. These are things that you want to look at to make sure that your technicians are doing, and things that you want to ensure yourself as the owner or the manager. We will actually look at the technician piece of it here in just a few minutes. First of all, you want to use a high volume, low pressure, airless, or an air-assisted airless spray gun, or a gun that demonstrates equivalent transfer efficiency of an HVLP. So we can reduce that because most shops do not use any type of airless equipment. So we can probably reduce that to saying you need to use HVLP, high volume, low pressure guns, or a gun that has an equivalent transfer efficiency of an HVLP. Many people are using some of, most of your paint gun companies out there like Iwata and SATA have what they call reduced pressure guns. And even though they're not HVLP guns, they do still have the same transfer efficiency or better than an HVLP, and those are perfectly acceptable. You need to have all spray application of coatings in a prep station or a spray booth. Your booth exhaust filters need to demonstrate a filter efficiency of 98%. You need to have an enclosed gun cleaner, or you can clean them in a disassembled cleaning solution. And we'll talk about exactly what each one of these means in more detail in a few minutes. And then you do have to conduct some spray painter training on a regular basis, and for the sake of this rule, at least every 5 years. So let's look at these a little closer one at a time. The spray area and what dictates what is the proper spray area. All the coatings must be in a prep station or a spray booth. A prep station or a spray booth must have 4 sidewalls or curtains and a full roof, as well as a ventilation system. Parts can be sprayed in what sometimes is referred to as a jam station that has 3 sides. That can be walls or curtains and a full roof. But most of the time, we're probably going to use a paint booth. There are shops that have what we call a jam booth that is a 3-sided booth. That is acceptable if you're only spraying parts. But what we have run into at times is I've had people say, well, what if I'm doing a quarter panel on a car, but I do have the car apart? Again, the intent of the law is that if I'm spraying a rolling chassis, then it should be done in a full booth, and only parts should be sprayed in a 3-sided curtain or jam station. Booth and prep station filters need to achieve a 98% filter efficiency of overspray. I was actually surprised when the rule first came out that filters would be able to achieve a 98% efficiency rating, but most paint booth filter companies do have filters that are capable of that. You probably will need to use like the fiberglass filters. The less expensive paper filters are probably not going to be 98% efficient. You probably will have to use more like the fiberglass type filters. When we look at the spray guns, the requirements for the spray guns, again, as we said, they need to be used so that you get the best transfer efficiency, and that's where the painter training comes in. How do we operate the gun and set it up so that we get maximum efficiency? We will talk about that in a few minutes. And then techniques to improve that transfer efficiency. So my actual spray techniques are good so that I get the proper efficiency.
I have a question here.
Okay.
How do I know what the efficiency of my booth filter is or the efficiency of my gun?
Okay. Probably would have addressed that before we got finished, but now is probably a good time to talk about that. As I said, I was really surprised that most paint booth filters are capable of achieving that. And the way that you probably want to document that is to go to the manufacturer of the filters that you use and just simply ask them for that documentation. Your jobber may be able to provide that for you. And then you can actually find it most of the time online. If you'll just Google the brand of filter that you're using, you can probably find the documentation on that. Probably Airflow Technology and Veladon are probably two of the largest filter companies in the country, and both of those provide that documentation upon request if you can't find it online. So that you can find. As far as your spray gun, finding documentation on that, again, you can Google that. You can go to SATA's website. You can go to Water's website, DeVilbiss, and the list is endless of brands of paint guns. But all of the major paint guns, because this rule has been in effect for 5 or 6 years now, pretty much all of the paint gun manufacturers out there are building guns that are capable of doing this, and they have the documentation on it. And any HVLP, if you're using an HVLP, that just automatically meets the criteria. If you're not using an HVLP and you have questions about the gun that you have, again, I would go to the paint gun manufacturer, go to their website, and you can probably find out, and you can get documentation on it. And so that's a very simple process. Okay, moving on, then let's talk about the equipment a little more. Again, anything that has a cup size larger than 3 ounces has to comply. It needs to be at least 65% and use 10 pounds of pressure per square inch at the cap. And that's pretty much all guns today. You can use airless spray guns, but airless spray guns typically does not work very well with automotive finished products, so chances are you're not using those. And then again, if it is an HVLP gun, or if it's not an HVLP gun, you just need to make sure that it does have the proper transfer efficiency. And again, looking at the filters, the purpose is to improve the quality of air and protect the environment. They need to give even airflow, capture the overspray, decrease emissions. And the other thing with the filters, beyond documenting that they're 98% efficient, is that you need to have a change-out schedule and a procedure. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. So let's review the compliance dates. Even though these dates are all passed, again, there are shops that haven't ever filed an initial notification, and so you may need to do that. A new shop had to file notification by 2017. I'm sorry, by 2007. If you open since then, you have to do that immediately. And the idea is if I'm building a new facility today, then it should be compliant from day one. So new shops or shops that opened since 2007 had to comply immediately. Existing shops had to comply by 2011. Painters must be trained within the first 2 years, and then the training has to be repeated every 5 years, and that's obviously why we're doing this today. And then all spray painters at new shops, or if you hire a painter, needs to complete the training no later than 180 days after they're hired. So if you've hired new painters since this was done, You know, even if you did it 4 or 5 years ago, if you've hired new painters since then they have to go through the training as well. And then all painters need to have a certificate to show the date of training. And we're going to talk about the certificates and what that means here in a few minutes. And then, like I say, the rule first came about in January 10 of 2010. If you haven't done anything, you're past due. And you've been fortunate that no one has found out. But I would go ahead and file notification if you haven't. So that brings us to record keeping, and some of the things that we've already talked about. This is where this more or less applies, and then also some of the things that we haven't talked about I want to speak to for a second. We do need to have our records organized and maintained for the EPA to review. Most states do not have adequate staff to come out and do inspections on this rule, and they will tell you that themselves. But that does not mean that you might not be surprised. I have dealt with shops where the EPA has come in. Most of the time, in the process of trying to be OSHA compliant, we probably have a lot of this done already. But what I have found every time that the EPA has come into a shop that I've worked with, or every time that OSHA has come into a shop that I've worked with, the problem was not what they were doing, but they simply just did not have the right documents in place, or didn't have the right things documented. So documentation or record keeping is the key to avoiding fines and penalties. If we have the right paper trail, that's probably 90% of the battle most of the time. So first of all, you want to keep copies of anything you have submitted. You want to have copies of your painter training certifications. You want to keep those as part of that EPA file. You want to have spray booth filter efficiency documentation, so you do need to go to whoever you're buying your filters from, or to the company's, the brand of filter that you're using, and get that documentation and have a printed copy of it. You do need to have documentation on the guns that your painters are using. So it is a good idea to go back to your paint shop, make a list of all the paint guns that are being used, determine if they do have the proper transfer efficiency of 65%, and document that with documentation from the company. I would keep all of that in a file, and I would keep it in a separate file just in case the EPA walks in and asks for your documentation on the 6H rule. If you are using MECI content, keep the information that you need, such as your material safety data sheets. Keep those in that file. And you probably also would want to keep a record of how much of it you buy per year, which there again you can probably get from your supplier. And then you need your annual usage and to make sure that it's less than a ton a year. And then anything that you found that you had a problem with that you had to correct, you do want to keep documents on the things that you found that were incorrect and what you did to correct them. The idea is not to try to prove that you're perfect, but to prove that that you're taking necessary actions to correct anything that is a problem. So the documentation is important. We mentioned also on the paint booth filters, besides just documenting the efficiency of the filters, you need a change-out schedule on your filters. How often do your technicians change the filters in your booth? If you use an outside service for maintenance on your booths, you could keep invoices or copies of where they had came in and serviced your booth. If you're doing that yourself, then you need to document how often you do that. That can be as simple as a form that you make up yourself that just shows what dates you changed the filters in your booth. But you do need to keep a copy of that. Some additional resources that we can go to get more information. You can go to www.epa.gov and then put in the rest of the tag there. I did leave the one listed on the screen for the state of Tennessee. And I only listed that there as an example. Every state, this is a federal law or a federal rule. So every state every state in the United States has to meet the requirements for the 6H rule. So even though it's a federal law, it's usually governed by the state that you're in. So your state cannot take anything away from the rule, but they can add to it. So you probably do need to review, go to EPA.gov and then find your state and review to make sure there's nothing added to the rule in your state, because every state can be different. They cannot do anything less than what we've talked about today, but they can add to it. So not only would I go to EPA.gov and review the things that we've talked about today, you may also want to go to your state and make sure that your state hasn't done anything additional. So that kind of gives us an overview of what the shop owner or the shop manager needs to look at. And for the short list, you need to make sure that you guys are spraying inside the booth or in a prep station or a jam type area that is curtained or walled off. You do need to make sure that the guns that they use are the proper guns that have a transfer efficiency of 65% or better. You do need to make sure that you're using the proper filters in your booths and that they're 98% efficient or better. And you do need to make sure that you keep schedules on changing those filters and that type of thing. Beyond that, you've got to have some training for your painters. And so that's what we're going to cover now, is exactly what the paint technician needs to know. You have a couple of options. You can get some painter training through other organizations like ICAR. You can get painter training through the paint companies that you use. Or you can actually take the things that we talk about today and do the paint training yourself. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the information that your painter needs to know. In the event that your painter is not sitting here beside you and listening to this information, you can go back and give your painters this training yourselves. And then what we're going to do is offer you a certificate that says that whoever sits through this session today and takes the test and sends it to us, we're going to complete a certificate saying that they at least went through this much of the training. So this is what's available to you. First of all, we're going to look at the objectives. We're going to talk about spray painting for paint technicians, and then we're going to look at cleanup and disposal, and then we'll look at the review at the end. You're going to see that we're going to repeat the same information that we just told the shop owner. You do need to have the right guns that have the right efficiency, an HVLP or one that's as efficient. You do need to make sure that your painters understand that the application of coatings needs to be done in a prep station or a spray booth. The filters need a 98% efficiency. And then the thing that we haven't spoke to is cleaning the guns. Cleaning paint guns does need to be done in a paint gun cleaner or a disassemble type method, and we'll talk about that in depth in a minute. And then the actual spray painter training, which has to do with the application and technique. We're going to look at all of those. It's required for anybody that's spraying, light duty, heavy trucks, buses, construction equipment, self-propelled vehicles, anything driven or drawn on the roadway, and all painters who spray HAP coatings or hazardous air pollutants. We have already talked about the guns, but for if your painter just joined you, the reason for using the HVLP guns versus the older type guns is better transfer efficiency. They are BOC compliant in all areas of the country. They do require a higher CFM of air, or cubic feet per minute, which is not the same thing as pressure. They use a lower air pressure at the cap. They're better for matching the OEM textures. And probably the number one reason, if you're the shop owner, to encourage your technicians to use HVLP guns is because of the savings on paint and materials. If you go back to an old siphon feed spray gun that we used years ago, those guns were about 25% efficient. So that means if I sprayed a gallon of paint, I'll put a quart of it on the car. The guns that we're using today, some of them are 75 and 80% efficient. So that means 80% of what we're putting through the gun is actually ending up on the car. And so you can see how that would create a tremendous material savings. Depending on the size of your shop and how many cars you're painting per day or per week, that could be as much as $13,000 in savings just by changing guns. So if your painters have been hesitant to buy new paint guns, it might be an investment that you would want to help them make. So let's talk about air volume versus air pressure. We mentioned a moment ago that the HVLP guns use a higher volume of air pressure or a higher volume of air. Volume is how much air you're using. Pressure is what state it's in when you're using it. So there is a difference between volume and pressure. Pressure drops in air hoses, so we need large enough air hoses to get the proper volume and the proper pressure. You should not use a 5/16" hose, which is fairly common for painting. You should make sure that your air hoses are at least 3/8 inches in diameter, inside diameter, at least 3/8, at lengths up to 50 feet. You do not probably want to use anything longer than 50 feet for painting because of the pressure loss. The rule is you lose about 5 pounds for every 20 to 25 feet of hose. So a 50-foot hose, you're going to lose about 10 pounds, and sometimes it's hard to make that up. So you probably want to keep your the hoses that you're going to use in your paint booth, you probably want to keep them as short as you can keep them, although anything less than 25 feet probably will not get you around the car, and 25 feet quite often will not get you around a large SUV. So most guys are going to use a 35 to 50-foot hose. Make sure you use high-flow air fittings. Even if you're using 3/8 air hoses, but you use air fittings that are 1/4 inch, you have reduced your air back to a 1/4 inch. And you can go out and spend a lot of money on very expensive paint guns, and if you starve them for air, you might as well go out and you know, and buy your paint guns at Home Depot. So you know, the quality of the gun is only going to be what it should be and be as efficient as it should be if you have the right volume of air. And you cannot get that in anything less than 3/8 inch. And if you're even though you're using a 3/8 inch hose, if you use inexpensive air fittings, you probably still are not going to be any better off. So you do want to make sure that you use high-flow air fittings. You want to adjust your pressure at the wall for the very same reason. If I put inexpensive regulators on the handle of the gun, again, I end up starving my gun. I might achieve the right pressure, but I will not have the right volume of air. So in order to do that, you want to adjust your air pressure with a wall regulator. And you can do that by putting you put an air pressure cap on the gun, adjust it at the wall till you get the pressure where it's supposed to be. And once you've got the pressure where it's supposed to be, you can take the regulator off or the gauge off and put your regular air cap back on. But you know, once you know what the guns that you use, and as long as you always use the same size hose and the same length hose and the same paint gun, then you can set it at the wall one time, and then from then on, you know what it needs to be at the wall to have the right pressure at the gun. So those are things that you probably need to do. As far as gun distance, distance and correct application. That really hasn't changed. We have always said 5 to 7 inches or 5 to 8 inches, and we call that the rule of thumb. If you open up your hand and you extend your thumb and your pinky as far as you can, it usually will measure somewhere between 5 and 7 inches or 5 and 8 inches, unless you have extremely big hands or extremely small hands. So we've always kind of used the rule of thumb. The optimum gun distance should be somewhere between 5 and 8 inches or 5 and 7 inches. If we use the correct application techniques, we will have good transfer efficiency. We will apply a wet film, a uniform finish. We will achieve faster coverage. We'll get better gloss in our clear coat. And the idea is to keep the gun perpendicular to the surface. With gravity feed guns, that's probably not quite the issue that it used to be with siphon feed guns. It is a little easier because the guns are balanced better to achieve a perpendicular angle to the surface. As far as fluid tip selection and viscosity, let's talk about those for just a moment. Fluid tip selection is critical for efficiency delivery of the product. We want to select the tip based on the manufacturer's recommendations, and that would be the paint manufacturer's recommendations. The recommendations can be found in your technical data sheets and in your paint manufacturer's manuals. What we are typically seeing today as products have become higher solid, especially for those of you who are using water-based paint, because they're so much higher solid product, you will probably need to use a smaller fluid tip, because with a HVLP gun, you have a high volume of air, but it's a much lower pressure. In the past, with old type spray guns, siphon feed guns, and prior to HVLP, we depended on air pressure to atomize the paint. And now, because of the high solid products and the high volume, low pressure guns, you need to depend on the fluid tip to help atomize the paint. So you need a smaller tip to break the paint up. Otherwise, you're going to have more orange peel than you want to have in your finish, and you're also going to probably have some color match issues as a result of that. I often refer to this as my soapbox, and because we're on a time frame today, I try to stay on my soapbox very long. But most painters, when they attend any type of paint training, especially if they go to a paint manufacturer's training, they will come back and tell you, yeah, the training was really good and the products worked perfect there, but that was not in the real world. It's not the same in our shop. And one of the things that I see most paint manufacturers doing is making sure in their schools that they have products reduced to the proper viscosity. Many of the products we use today have a mix ratio, and so painters and technicians assume that if I mix it to the proper ratio, I should have the proper viscosity. How long the can has been open affects viscosity. If I'm using a gallon of clear and I use part of it today and I come back in and use part of it tomorrow and then part of it the next day, once we've broken the seal on the product, typically products do get a little thicker the longer they sit on the shelf. If somebody if your supplier brings a product in, it has not had time to warm up to the proper temperature, it will have a higher viscosity. So in order to achieve the right viscosity, products need to be at the right temperature, and they need to be fresh. And sometimes they may have sat on the shelf for a while. Even if it hasn't been opened, the product can become thicker. So the idea is that you want to make sure you're using the proper viscosity. Using products that are reduced to the exact viscosity will ensure the proper texture. It'll ensure color match. It'll make the product lay down as it's like it's supposed to. The metallics lay out better. Everything about paint works better at the right viscosity, and you will become, the more uniform you become, the better you will become as a painter. And quite often, it's the one thing we ignore is viscosity. You can take a viscosity cup and check viscosity each time you mix paint. And typically what I hear is that I can't do that because it's too time consuming. And the reality is it takes 21 seconds to check
we
the
have a
viscosity.
question, Tony, that actually there's a question for you that says, what's the best way to check for the right viscosity?
Okay, that's exactly where we're going. Every paint manufacturer uses a viscosity cup. They will specify, there are a couple of different types. There's what they call a Ford cup, which has nothing to do with the Ford vehicle. But there is a Ford cup, and then there's one called a Zahn cup, and they make different numbers, like a Zahn number 2. Every paint manufacturer will tell you which cup to use, and they will tell you exactly which number cup to use. The way that a viscosity cup works, it's kind of like a soup ladle. You dip it into the product. It's got a hole drilled in the bottom of it, and you time how long it takes the paint to run out of the hole. Most paints will need to be reduced to a viscosity of about 21 seconds. So it takes roughly 21 seconds to check the viscosity on the product. If I have to adjust it and check it a second time, I have now taken 22 seconds. If I have to do it 3 times to get it right, it takes a minute. So the excuse of it takes too long is not a valid excuse. Okay? It's just not. And most paint manufacturers probably will provide you with a viscosity cup if you use it. So it is a key to everything that's good about paint, developing good practices with your paint. And it's something that I never see. In 36 years, I have never walked into a paint mixing room and seen anybody using a viscosity cup. And it's one of those things that we just don't adopt. And we use mixing sticks. We use ratios. We might even mix it on the scale. But none of those ensures that it's the proper viscosity. Like I say, that's kind of my soapbox as a trainer, and I'll get off of that soapbox and we'll move on. Overlap. You probably want to follow what your paint manufacturer says, but most of them will say somewhere between 65 and 75% overlap with each pass. If we do the right overlap, we probably will get less modeling, less striping of metallic colors. We get a consistent film build, an even texture, and right material savings. Paint gun cleaning is one of the last things that we're going to look at. Most of us are using some type of gun cleaner. We may be using an outside company that comes in and maintains that gun cleaner, or we may have purchased our own. And if we're using an enclosed gun cleaner, that meets the rule. Your painters may say, I don't want to put my expensive guns in a gun cleaner, when you never know what someone has poured in there. So if that's the case, there are other methods, and we're going to talk about that. The thing that we're trying to achieve is not to spray solvent through the gun. And at some point in time, if you've been around body shops very much, you probably have walked into a shop, or if you drive around behind the shop, there might be a painter standing at the door spraying solvent through their gun to clean it out. And if you're spraying solvent through the gun, that is a violation of the rule. Also, it's pretty common to see painters go into the booth and spray solvent into the filters with the assumption of, I'm spraying it into the filters, so it's okay. Spraying solvent into the filters, solvent passes right through the filters. Okay, the filters are there to catch pigment and overspray, excuse me, but they will not collect solvent. So, you know, if you want to spray solvent through the gun, there's just not any way to do that and be in compliance with the rule. So you want to use an enclosed gun cleaner. Some states that is absolutely required. Or the other method, if it's not required in your state, you can clean the gun by disassembling it and cleaning it in inside of a container, such as a metal bucket. You can go out and purchase a 5-gallon metal bucket, and you can break your guns apart and clean them with a brush inside that bucket. The only thing is, when you reassemble the gun, you don't need to spray solvent through it. And also, when you finish, you either have to dispose of that cleaning fluid, or you have to seal that bucket up. So if you go out and buy yourself a metal bucket that has a lid, and you can seal that up, you can just wash them in a bucket. You do not have to go out and buy an expensive paint gun cleaner, although that is probably the best option. And then that brings us to waste management practices. Most everyone has probably been following these practices for years and years, and that is that the waste generated in a collision center is usually considered hazardous waste by the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So you need to dispose of it properly, and that means you need to use a licensed and insured hauler that carries it to a recycling center, and that's considered, it is your property until it arrives at that recycling center and you receive a manifest back from that. So the best practices is not actually a part of the rule, other than they just recommend that you be following best practices. And if you're OSHA compliant and EPA compliant in other areas of your shop besides the 6H rule, you already have this covered, so won't spend a lot of time there. So let's do a quick review. First of all, the first question would be: a technician paints cars and light trucks at a local collision center. Is this technician required to have documented training under the rule? And the answer to that obviously would be yes. Question number 2 would be: which of the following helps improve transfer efficiency? And it would be all of these things: proper spray gun setup, proper gun distance, and the proper spray overlap. Where may coatings may be sprayed under the rule? Enclosed prep stations and enclosed booths. And we said that they do have to have, booths do have to have 4 walls and a ceiling. It can be curtains and a ceiling, but it does have to be 4 walls. Jam stations, or sometimes called prep stations, can be 3 walls. How may spray guns be cleaned under the rule? Enclosed gun cleaner, or we can clean them by hand inside, like in a bucket, but break them apart. Does my shop have to notify the EPA that we're compliant to the rule? And the answer to that would be yes. How often is paint trainer recertification required? We said that is every 5 years. Is a facility that does not apply target HAPs automatically exempt from the rule? The answer to that would be no. There are no automatic exemptions.
I have a question, Tony. It says,
yes.
Are parking lot lizards under the same rules?
That's a good question. I'm familiar with the terminology, and the answer would be they do have to comply to the same rule. And so if they're not using some type of portable paint booth, they're in violation. And that's where the 3-ounce cup rule created a loophole that honestly the EPA did not intend to create. When they put the 3-ounce cup rule in there, that was actually for people who are hobbyists. They were not aware that there are people that paint in parking lots on a regular basis. And so they put that 3-ounce cup rule in there. And if a guy's in a parking lot painting and he is using a 3-ounce or less cup and he is only filling it one time, then technically he is within the law or within the rule. But that was not the intent of that 3-ounce cup rule. So again, he should still be, if he is doing this as a business, he is still required to do notification, and that puts him under the same rules as everybody else. They may be escaping because of the 3-ounce rule, but that was not the intent of the law. And that's not probably the answer that most people want to hear, but that's the truth. So the next question: are non-refillable aerosols exempt from the rule? And the answer to that would be yes. So products that you can buy in aerosol form are automatically exempt. The rule requires my shop to document that the spray booth filters have a 98% efficiency or greater. And obviously the answer to that is yes. And the last question, proper overlap for spray coatings is 65 to 75%. And I would follow whatever the manufacturer recommends on that. So you will be receiving a copy of the same questions that we just reviewed. And
I have one more question for you, too.
Okay.
You ready?
Go ahead.
Is this 6H compliance the same as the EPA Rule 40 CFR 63?
Yes.
Okay.
It is the same. Okay, so you will be receiving a painter certification test. I think Melissa said earlier this is recorded. So if you want to go back and review this, and if you want to do this training with all of your painters, you can send us this painter certification test. She's going to give you the instructions on how to do that. And if you send us that test, we will send you a certificate, and so that you can document that. And that will be made available to you very soon. And in closing, again, my name is Tony Nethery, and I am the CEO and owner of Blue Collar Collision Training. And our tagline is this training that works. We do try to do hands-on training, and we try to come to your shop normally and roll our sleeves up and help you get done what really needs to be done. It's not consulting. It's actually you tell me what you're trying to accomplish, and we'll try to help you do that. We work with ocean EPA assistance. We do estimating and sales training. We do marketing and social media planning. Production process improvements, if you're interested in lean and that type of thing. We do training assistance. If you need help achieving your ICAR training or ASE training, ASE certification, we can help with that. We also do some materials management assistance to help you become more effective with your paint materials and more profitable. My contact information is there, and we'll send that out to you when we send out the test as well. If there's any other questions, I'm open for questions.
And I also want to just follow up with what Tony said by saying if everybody could take the test and return it to us by December 23rd, we'd appreciate that because we want to avoid delays in receiving the certificates. So as soon as we're done and I get all the reports from this webinar, I will email all of you the information. And as Tony said, it will have instructions on what you need to do and where you need to send it. So if anybody has any more questions, I'd be happy to read them to Tony, but I don't see any. I think you did a great job. I think, again, we recorded it, so if you need to hear this at a later date, you can watch it. And I'll send a copy of the PowerPoint as well. So I don't see any more questions, and we're right about at 59 minutes, so we're right on time. All right, thank you, everyone. And please continue to send us your suggestions on future webinars, and we'll try to accommodate you. Thanks. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.